All right, so here's our agenda for today. It's pretty short, but we've got a lot of good content for you. So we're going to start off with introductions, and I'm going to let Bruce go first.
Oh, thanks, Tim. So I've been at the organization for 21 years. I'm the vice president, and I think I've been working with Tim for about 15 of those years. A lot of my experience and background comes from helping our customers through some of the security ailments, whether it's in the protection mode or as things have happened. I also frequently speak on This Month in Cybersecurity, which is a monthly webinar we give around topics like ransomware and phishing and kind of what's been in the news recently. So hoping to bring all those things to the table, and glad that you're with us. Tim?
So my name's Tim Homan. I've worked 20 plus years in public education and recently come over to Peters, and my perspective has changed greatly being on this side of the fence. So security was never a high priority, was always on the list, and I've come to realize how critical this is and how much schools need to pay attention to it. So I thought I'd start today off with a little personal story from the district I was at last. What is phishing? What does that look like? Schools have traditionally been known for lack of transparency, and since the advent of a web page and you can start sharing your information, they've become much more transparent. And now I kind of look at that as a shopping list for the bad guys. You post everything about your school now, who your teachers are, what they teach. Every time a new employee is hired, it's on the board page for approval. It gets posted as news. And we had an incident where a new teacher received an email on a Sunday from the principal, and it said, "I'm in meetings all day and I need your help." And the new teacher, wanting to be helpful, replied, and several $100 later in gift cards, it turns out that wasn't the principal's personal Gmail account. It was somebody phishing them. So the FBI defines phishing, as someone falsely claiming to be a legitimate business or individual, and they're trying to deceive you to divulge personal information. So it could be your login, it could be credit card information, bank information, or they're trying to get you to go to a website where they can capture your credentials. I've got a bunch of statistics for you, and I kind of grouped them into two different areas. So persistence, phishing's been around, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. Since 2016, there have been 704 cyber incidents targeted at K-12 in the United States. 91% of attacks are launched with a phishing email. In most cases, jumped ahead, it takes 6 months to detect a data breach, and 61% of those breaches were with companies that had fewer than 1,000 employees. So the next category is exposure. There has been an 80% increase in malware attacks on Macintosh computers. Everyone thought Macs were safe, there are no viruses there, but that's not the case anymore. 65% of companies have over 500 employees that have never changed their password. In 2018, 30% of United States users opened a phishing email, and 12% of those people that opened the email clicked on the attachment or the link that was included. And we kind of look at this as the persistence of this threat. Your exposure to it equals your risk. So, looking at phishing in a little more detail, an email address. It looks like it's someone you know, but email addresses can be spoofed. There's some things you can put in place to prevent that, DMARC and DKIM and SPF, some technical things. But if your account is compromised, you could be sending legitimate email from an actual account, and the bad guys can be using that against you. Right? People click on these emails because it's enticing, right? A free iPhone or your credit card will be suspended. So I need to take action. The example I gave earlier would be an example of a spear-phishing attack where it was directed to an individual. Phishing used to be a broad net. We would just send the same email out and see if anybody would respond. Well, the bad guys are getting smarter. Now they're looking at your web page, finding out who you are, and adding your name into the email so it looks more legitimate. In the old days, the easiest way to spot a phishing email was to read it because the grammar was so bad. It obviously couldn't have come from someone legit, but things have gotten better. So now not only is there spell checking, there's grammar checking. So the emails look more legit. And finally, they can incorporate, real information from a real website. So it's got the MasterCard logo or your bank's logo, and it's that much more enticing to get you to click on it. So
one thing I'd add in on that, Tim, is that there's also a volume too. I mean, there used to be a day, and obviously it goes back quite a ways, where people were excited to get mail. Remember that AOL theme of "You've got mail," right? People were excited; they're getting email. I don't think anyone gets excited about email anymore. There's just a high volume, and people are looking at email as like a transaction system, right? And get through these things pretty quick. And with that rote and the volume, I think that's another component that's adding things here. And so we threw up on the slide a couple of ways to spot a fish. I think Tim's kind of walked through a couple, but let me just take a look at this. Obviously, the whole goal here is to kind of generate a sense that something just doesn't look right, and maybe it's not definitely number one, but a little bit of number six. It's almost a little bit of a gut feeling, but there certainly are some characteristics that are defined here on the page. As Tim had mentioned, the days of misspellings and grammar are over, but mismatched and misinformation, especially around links, is really important. We've got an example on the next page we'll kind of walk through here, but just looking through some of these is the key. And that's fine. I think we can move to the next page. This encompasses all of them. Is this an email that you or your users would click on? Possibly, right? And I would say possibly only because, as Tim pointed out, 30% of people are clicking on these emails, right? And so we have to be prepared for this to come through our systems, to have controls that will try to prevent these things, but eventually they'll land. And security awareness and your employees, teachers, students, staff are all going to be subject to these. And if presented with the following on their screen, are they going to notice that there's a little bit of a mismatch in the upper left, that the domain is a little suspicious there, or on line 2 and on the subject line there is that you might not have even known you had an account. Oh no, your gift card or account. I didn't even know I had an account. There might be some instances where they do, or if it's PayPal, there's a likelihood that they do, things of that nature. If you look down at the link, right, you're just looking at, the links don't look right, or below that, they're asking for confidential information. You really, and hopefully, you're starting to develop a culture of awareness at your organizations, but confidential information should not be sent via email. Period. Email is a relatively open system, meaning that it's not a secure system from a encryption perspective, and so no information really should ever be transferred via email that is of a confidential nature. There's things called secure email and things for that. But notice symptoms like on number 3, the $100 gift card, right? There's always some kind of bait or something attractive about it. And one of the things that they've been doing recently to make these things more real is in the subject lines. We've been receiving, and we certainly have had some customers where they're sending you a previous password. So your credentials, believe it or not, have been harvested through time. And so this might have been a password that was stolen back, 5 years ago. That said, if they have some information about you, like a dark web password that was available, sending that email to you, even if it's part of a scripted send to thousands of people, having your password that you previously had used in there makes it much more attractive. Oh, this person really knows me. They've got my previous password, or they might have other details about your life that might be, you're at your home in Palatine, or your home in Hinsdale. Here are the so they can include those characteristics in the email to make it more attractive and get you to that 30% open rate within your organization. So moving on, there's another technique I just kind of wanted to show you, the domain aspect of it, which a lot of users kind of key in the domain in the upper left and say, oh, I know that that's not from legitimate corp. Well, look at what they can do with words to just kind of match legitimate corp as an example. You can make an M from an R and an N really easily. So I guess domain spoofing, as this is called, is a pretty common way to get people to not see, or including an extra character effectively in any domain, means that that's another level of believability. And on the next one, on the next slide, again, the email is just the goal of getting you to act, right? And so again, 30% of people are acting on emails if they're arriving in their inbox. That said, usually from those links where they send you, now you have another layer of deception, okay? And that layer of deception is typically a well-formed web page. It is so easy to create a PayPal or Facebook or other web page. There are kits for generation. It takes nothing to take a every page that you've logged into, whether it be CNN or Fox or any page, can be recreated in seconds. And so the Facebook page, as a good example here, is an example where all the logos are there, everything's in the right spot. Who looks at the login or who looks at the domain in the upper left-hand corner? So this is the goal here, obviously, is on this web page. If you were to log in as an example, it actually is going to direct you from there. It's got your credentials now because you logged them onto a web page that was not Facebook. And then from there, it's going to take those credentials and it's going to go pass them over to a real Facebook page. And from there forward, you're going to see your feed. So you might not have even known on your trip to Facebook that you provided credentials to a site in between. And so login and password harvesting is one goal of theirs. A second might be donation of money to a charity. So you clicked on the email hoping that you're providing donations for the most recent hurricane victims. You're at a site that says, Hurricane Florence or Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane you pick .com, and indeed that money is going off to a PayPal fund or to a GoFundMe page somewhere. And then the last thing that can happen while you're on this page is you could, just by clicking anywhere within the page, it could initiate a software download to your machine in the background, which could be drive-by malware, something like the ransomware that we spoke of last week. So really just kind of wanted to kind of set the scene as to what's happening. The phishing email is the beginning. And then as Tim, you may have given the stat, but once people arrive at a page like this, there's a 12% likelihood that they're going to act on this page. So 30% on the email, 12% on the page. You do the numbers, you send out an email to 1,000 people, and you're going to get some responses. And so that's why this has become a profitable business.
So that nicely leads us into, how do you quantify that click rate? It's called the Fishbone Percentage. So it's your employees' susceptibility to clicking on. Unfortunately, we are getting worse at this. And, employees are your school's last line of defense. And so what the numbers tell us is that they are getting worse between 2017 and 2018. And in education, specifically last year, education's at 34%. So what can we do about this? training is the key. So a combination of computer-based training and then simulated phishing attacks, just 90 days can bring that down to 19%. And if you do that for a whole year, you can get that down to 3%. And why is all this important, right? What are the risks involved with this? Bruce mentioned some of them. As an individual, you can have your identity stolen, your financial information, social security, medical records. If your credentials get stolen at your school district, they can use your information now to start to phish other people. That can lead to data loss. Eventually, that can lead to the installation of ransomware. So may seem benign. I clicked on the link, it's not a big deal, but the consequences can be compounding. So I'll have Bruce walk you through, if your account gets compromised, what does that look like?
Yeah, it seems so simple, right? And specifically on the mailbox, we've been seeing a significant amount of this in the last few years. Login credentials are compromised for an individual. What does that mean? That means they either found on the dark web, or they guessed your password, or they phished your password. But either way, your login name and password are now known. What do? They're logging into the mailbox, and they're sitting there watching your emails. And you're having some correspondence. Maybe you're in the business office for your school, and you're having some correspondence about vendor payment, accounting, HR. And when you're having those conversations, they simply are saying, okay, and by the way, they're looking for trigger words, right? Payroll, money, transfer, vendor, and they have scripts that essentially are looking for these conversations. They then take over your email conversation. So you sent the email out to vendor A. Vendor A responds back to you. They then reply back to vendor A with this in the same thread, and they've taken it over. That's where they're impersonating. And they're, by the way, our payment has changed. We are now sending all of our payments through Bank of America, and here's the link. And now the payment for vendor A is coming in to a Bank of America account that you don't own. By the way, the emails that were coming inbound now are all hidden from you. They're usually going into the RSS feeds folder we're finding. Some have been other temporary folders, not even going into your deleted items, right? They're hiding and masking the conversation from there forward. And then at the very end, they may plant ransomware on your machine as an attempt to kind of thwart you to, oh, wow, I've got this ransomware issue. Yeah, well, before that, you had a business email compromise issue. We saw this happen at organizations and schools. One organization we had sending $400,000 plus to the wrong location. We had a phishing email that came into HR department a few weeks ago and directed a payroll change for them. It was from an employee, quote unquote, and the payroll was changed because HR didn't have procedures that included validation or voice validation or anything of that nature. Changed the payroll, and obviously they discovered the error after the next payroll had been sent to the wrong location. So it's things like this that are real. They're happening every day, and fortunately we've got some tools or some methods to help on that. And Tim, on the next slide, we kind of threw together, unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that there was a silver bullet, right? And one technology, and certainly, don't be sold by those that feel that there can be. Every solution might be great within itself, but we're finding that there's a combination of things that are necessary. And specifically, those combinations fit into 3 buckets. The people bucket, or people column, the middle area of process, and the last area of technology. In the people area, you're here today kind of learning about security awareness, and training and testing, and having a formalized plan for security training and helping organizations either recognize phishing, knowing what to do around ransomware, testing and validating those procedures through some through testing exercises, just like we do in our schools today with our students. So that's definitely one component. But if you're only reliant on that, right, it's if you were sent 100, if your inbox was filled up with 100 phishing emails, your likelihood of clicking on one of them is much higher. So we skip over to the right-hand side where the technology's at, and having a cleaner inbox due to a next generation scanner out in front, looking for domain and user spoofing, things like that. Having users have to log in, not with just their login and passwords, but also with another factor, whether it be another login and password, another layer, or more likely a multi-factor system, which might include the device that everyone's carrying around, such as phones. A lot of technologies today are building a multi-factor in, and while it's not for every product and offering that's out there today, multi-factor authentication is a strong way to stop things. And there's a number of other technologies in that space. I won't drill in too much, but things like DNS protection for where people are going on the internet, as well as some other next gen protection. But then the middle area, I think that's the area where I think IT can have the greatest impact with the lowest cost, and that is just doing the basics correctly. I think we chatted significantly about this last week on the ransomware, but patching. Okay, and Tim, maybe you could tell your story about the school you recently visited, but patching and antivirus generation and having good procedures in HR so that they're not changing payroll, just based on an email coming in. You want to be convenient, but in today's world where there's impersonation happening, you're going to need better procedures, and that includes response plans for IT. What's going to happen when eventually, and I don't mean to, scare everyone, but things will happen. And it may not happen to you today or tomorrow, but it will happen 6 months or a year or 2 years. And having a basic response plan as to what you're going to do, thinking it through to paper, and making sure that others around you are aware of what their roles are in that. Are we going to disconnect network plugs? Are we, how are we going to trace emails? Who are we going to call? All of those things kind of fit in that process bucket. Tim, you want to tell your story about the organization school you were interacting with?
Sure. Part of my role here is working with our customers that we manage some aspect of their environment, and we're doing an annual health check. So I had a call this week. We reviewed a bunch of different information about this district, and one of the things we're looking at is Windows 7 machines that are end of service. So the last update for Windows 7 is going to come out in January. If your machine is on beyond January and there's a risk identified, it's not going to be patched. And so I asked, what's your plan for your Windows 7 machines? Well, we really don't like Windows 10, so we're going to stick with Windows 7. I said, well, what are you doing for patching? Well, we image them once a year. We're really not worried about patching them. Okay. How are you doing with passwords? Well, our administration really doesn't want to be hassled with password changes. So you are ripe for a problem. You're checking all the boxes that the bad guys are looking for. So, what is your plan to address this? Do you have a cybersecurity plan in place? Does that plan include, detection? How many incidents do you detect in a week? At Peters, we have people who every day are looking at this, and there are several different tools that we use. So we know right away when an incident happens. If you do have a plan, does it, apply industry standards and best practice? Is that plan tested, right? Because a plan that just sits on the shelf but it's never been tested, is that really an effective plan? And, does your leadership know what the impacts are? So the school district, that I was talking to, if your IT department isn't worried about it, how is your administration, superintendent, school board, how are they going to help you out if you're not worried about it? What now? What can we do? What we can do is offer you a free phishing test. So we use a product, we can load your users into it, send them all a fake email and see who responds, and we can give you a report on that. You can come to our next webinar. We're going to get into some of the response planning and some of the solutions that we can provide or that are out there. And then we're just wrapping up an update to our cybersecurity ransomware guide, which is going to be a great tool to help you navigate through these situations. Anything else you want to add, Bruce, or?
No, I think that's really it. I think, as we mentioned, there's no silver bullet. And I guess the one comment I was going to make is on our detection every day. We've got we see logins to mailboxes, not real time, but within a few minutes to hours of when they're occurring. Okay, they're often occurring from foreign countries. Nigeria, in specific, has been a prolific user, if you will, of compromised credentials, which typically occur via phishing. We also see them from Amazon Web Server services that are set up temporarily as a login and staging point for that. So upon seeing these logins, this is where, if you'll refer back to Tim's stats, this is where actions can be taken immediately so that mailboxes can't be used for, people can't snoop for as long, and there's no dwell time, as Tim was showing on his stat screen, where usually they're in there for 6 months or so, looking around and finding other ways to either plant other seeds, I guess, within your network. And our goal is not to necessarily stop them. After all, when we're seeing a login compromise, they're already in. The fact is just trying to clean up around where they're at and make sure that they don't have the time to sit on your network and provide issues. So those are some of the services that we're looking at, and we know organizations can spend the time, I guess, to kind of stop things at the front door where they can. So, Tim, thanks very much for providing the guidance, and I think this looks great. And we look forward to chatting with you guys next week as we kind of wrap up this series. But thanks again for everyone's attendance and attention today.